The mining colony on Kepler 442b was supposed to be routine. Marcus Chen had signed up for the 3-year contract because the pay was good, and he needed to get off Earth. After his wife died in the transport accident, staying home felt like drowning in memories. The red dwarf sun of this distant world cast everything in an orange glow that made the rocky landscape look like Mars, except this place actually had breathable air and strange purple vegetation that grew in twisted spirals. Marcus worked the deep excavation sites, operating the massive drilling equipment that carved through layers of crystalline ore. The company had found something valuable here, some kind of rare mineral that made electronics work better. He didn't ask too many questions. The less he knew, the less complicated his life stayed. The first sign of trouble came during his morning shift. The ground sensors started picking up unusual vibrations. Not the steady rhythm of mining equipment, but something irregular, almost organic. Marcus reported it to his supervisor, but Jenkins just shrugged and told him to keep digging. Corporate had quotas to meet, and strange readings weren't going to stop the profit machine. 3 days later, everything changed. Marcus was operating Drill Unit 7 when the ground beneath him gave way. Not a cave-in, but something else entirely. The earth seemed to melt and flow like liquid, creating a perfect circular opening that descended into darkness. His drill rig tilted dangerously, and Marcus had to scramble to safety as the massive machine tumbled into the hole with a thunderous crash that echoed for several minutes. Standing at the edge of the new chasm, Marcus peered down with his helmet light. The walls weren't natural rock formation. They were smooth, metallic, clearly artificial. Geometric patterns covered the surfaces, glowing faintly with an inner light that pulsed like a heartbeat. This wasn't a mining operation anymore. They had discovered something that was never supposed to be found. Within hours, the colony buzzed with activity. Scientists arrived from the main settlement, bringing equipment Marcus had never seen before. Dr. Sarah Walsh, the xenoarchaeologist, took one look at the symbols, and her face went pale. She immediately placed calls to Earth, speaking in hushed tones about protocols and containment procedures. Marcus learned fragments of the truth over the following days. The structure below was ancient, possibly millions of years old, clearly built by an intelligent species. But the mineral they had been mining wasn't just valuable for electronics. It was some kind of power source that had been keeping whatever was down there dormant. The mining operation had destabilized the entire system. Energy readings spiked daily, and strange sounds echoed from the depths. Not mechanical sounds, but something that almost resembled voices. The corporate executives wanted to continue extraction, but Dr. Walsh argued for immediate evacuation. The arguing went on for weeks while Marcus and the other miners kept working, though everyone felt the growing tension. Then came the night when everything went wrong. Marcus was in his quarters trying to sleep despite the constant humming that had started emanating from the excavation site, when the emergency alarms began screaming. Red lights flooded the corridors as he grabbed his emergency gear and rushed outside. The sky above the mining site was wrong. Instead of the usual orange glow from Kepler 442b's red dwarf sun, brilliant white light poured upward from the chasm like a reverse lightning bolt. The air itself seemed to shimmer and bend, creating optical illusions that made Marcus dizzy. Other miners stood around in confusion, some pointing at the light show, others backing away in obvious fear. Dr. Walsh emerged from the research station, her face grim with determination. She carried a device Marcus didn't recognize, something that beeped rapidly and displayed scrolling data. "The containment field is failing," she announced to the gathered crowd. "Whatever we disturb down there is waking up." The ground began to shake, not the familiar tremors of mining equipment, but deep rhythmic pulses that seemed to come from the planet's core. With each pulse, the white light grew brighter and more intense. Marcus shielded his eyes, but he could still see the glow through his closed eyelids. That's when they appeared, rising from the chasm like ghosts made of light. The first aliens any human had ever encountered emerged into the world above. They weren't the gray-skinned creatures from old Earth movies or the insectoid monsters from horror stories. These beings were tall and elegant, with elongated limbs and skin that seemed to be made of living crystal. They moved with fluid grace as if gravity affected them differently than it affected humans. The lead creature, taller than the others and wearing what appeared to be ceremonial armor, approached the group of humans. When it spoke, the words somehow appeared directly in Marcus's mind rather than entering through his ears. The communication felt strange but clear, like hearing his own thoughts spoken in someone else's voice. "We are the Zalari," the being said. "Your species has awakened us from the long sleep. The sacred crystals that powered our stasis chambers have been disturbed. We do not know how much time has passed, but we sense that our homeworld is gone, consumed by the dying of our sun eons ago." Dr. Walsh stepped forward, her scientific training overcoming her fear. "We didn't know," she said aloud, hoping the aliens could understand spoken language as well as they could project thoughts. "We're explorers, miners. We came here looking for resources to help our own people." The Zalari leader tilted its head, studying the humans with large, multifaceted eyes that sparkled like cut diamonds. "Your species is young," it observed. "We can sense your emotional patterns, your fear and curiosity mixing together. You are not the destroyers we expected to find when we finally awakened." Marcus found himself stepping forward, though he wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the way the alien spoke, with a sadness that reminded him of his own grief. "What happened to your people?" he asked. "We are all that remains," the Zalari replied. 300 survivors of a civilization that once spanned 12 star systems. We placed ourselves in stasis hoping to outlast the cosmic disaster that claimed our worlds. We never expected to sleep for so long or to wake to find another species had evolved and spread to the stars. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. These weren't invaders or threats. They were refugees, survivors of an unimaginable catastrophe, and humanity had accidentally disturbed their final resting place. The mining operation had essentially grave-robbed an ancient civilization's tomb. The standoff lasted 3 tense days. Corporate headquarters demanded that mining operations continue, arguing that the aliens had no legal claim to the mineral deposits. The Zalari, meanwhile, explained that the crystals weren't just power sources, but sacred relics containing the preserved consciousness of their ancestors. To them, the human mining operation was equivalent to desecrating a cemetery and stealing the headstones. Marcus found himself caught in the middle, translating between Dr. Walsh's scientific questions and the Zalari's complex explanations. The aliens seemed to have chosen him as their primary contact, though he couldn't understand why. He was just a drill operator, not a diplomat or scientist. Yet whenever the Zalari leader spoke, its multifaceted eyes focused on him with an intensity that made his skin tingle. "You carry deep sorrow," the Zalari leader told him during one of their conversations. Its name, as close as Marcus could pronounce it, was Thesiandra. "We sense the loss of your bonded companion. Among our people, such grief creates a resonance that others can feel across great distances." Marcus nodded, surprised by how easily he could discuss his wife's death with this alien being. Her name was Elena. She died in a transport accident 2 years ago. "That's why I came out here, to get away from the memories." "Memory is sacred," Thesiandra replied. "It is what connects us to those who have passed beyond the physical realm. Your miners have been harvesting the crystallized memories of our ancestors. Each stone contains thousands of years of accumulated wisdom and experience." The revelation made Marcus feel sick. He thought about all the tons of crystal ore they had shipped back to Earth, processed into components for computers and communication devices. Somewhere in Earth's factories, alien souls were being ground up and melted down into smartphone parts. Dr. Walsh had been documenting everything, but her reports to corporate were being ignored. The executives saw only profit margins and production quotas. The discovery of intelligent alien life should have been the most important event in human history. But the mining company treated it as a minor inconvenience that was slowing down their operations. The situation reached a breaking point when corporate sent a security team to the colony. 12 armed guards arrived with orders to remove the alien obstruction and get the mining back on schedule. Marcus watched the shuttle land with growing dread, knowing that these men had no understanding of what they were walking into. Captain Rodriguez, the security team leader, was a former military man who saw everything as a tactical problem to be solved with the right application of force. He took one look at the Zalari and immediately classified them as hostile entities. "We have authorization to use whatever means necessary to clear this site," he announced to Dr. Walsh and the mining supervisors. "These are sentient beings," Dr. Walsh protested. "They're refugees, survivors of an extinct civilization. We can't just attack them. They're squatters on company property," Rodriguez replied, "and they're interfering with lawful business operations. We've dealt with eco-terrorists before." Same principles apply. Marcus tried to explain the situation to Thysiandra, but the Zilari leader's mental voice carried a new tone, something like resignation mixed with ancient anger. Your species follows a pattern we have observed before, it said. When faced with something you don't understand, you seek to control or destroy it. We had hoped you might be different. The first shot came without warning. One of Rodriguez's men, nervous and trigger-happy, opened fire when a younger Zilari moved too quickly while approaching the human group. The energy weapon's beam struck the alien in the chest, and instead of falling, the creature seemed to dissolve into motes of light that scattered on the wind. The effect on the other Zilari was immediate and terrible. They began to glow brighter, their crystalline skin taking on a fierce radiance that hurt to look at directly. The air around them shimmered with heat distortion, and the ground beneath their feet began to crack and smoke. You have murdered a child, Thysandra's mental voice thundered, no longer calm and philosophical but filled with rage that made Marcus's skull ache. A youngling barely 3 centuries old, curious about your species and eager to learn your ways. You have proven yourselves to be exactly what we feared. Rodriguez ordered his men to open fire, but their weapons seemed to have no effect on the remaining Zilari. The energy beams passed through the aliens like they were made of light and mist. In response, the aliens raised their elongated arms and the air itself became a weapon. Invisible forces lifted the security team off their feet and held them suspended, struggling helplessly. Stop, Marcus shouted, stepping between the two groups. This doesn't have to happen. We can find another way. Tysandra turned its multifaceted gaze toward him, and for a moment Marcus felt the full weight of alien grief and fury pressing against his mind. Your companion was stolen from you by accident, it said. Our youngling was murdered by choice. How do you propose we find peace with such creatures? Dr. Walsh moved to stand beside Marcus, her face pale but determined. Because not all humans are like them, she said, gesturing toward the suspended security team. Some of us are capable of growth, of learning from our mistakes. Give us a chance to prove that. The standoff stretched on for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Marcus could feel the tension building in the air, a charge like the moment before lightning strikes. The other miners and scientists had backed away, sensing that they were witnessing something that would determine the future relationship between two species. Then, cutting through the deadly silence came a new sound, a child's cry, high and frightened, echoing from somewhere deep in the crystalline structure below ground. But this wasn't a human child. The sound carried harmonics that no human throat could produce, a complex melody of distress that seemed to resonate in Marcus's bones. Thysandra's posture changed immediately, its anger replaced by concern. Impossible, it whispered in his mind. That is Ysera, the princess's daughter. She was placed in deep stasis, too young to survive the awakening process. Something has gone wrong with her preservation chamber. The crying continued, growing more desperate and frightened with each passing moment. Dr. Walsh checked her instruments, and her face went ashen. The mining destabilized more than we thought, she said. There are cascade failures happening throughout the underground structure. If there are more survivors down there. Marcus didn't wait for permission or orders. He grabbed his emergency gear and headed for the chasm entrance. Show me the way, he called to Thyssandra. If there's a child in danger, human or alien, I'm not going to stand here arguing while she suffers. Thyssandra hesitated for only a moment before gesturing for him to follow. The path is treacherous and the structure is failing. You risk your life for a being you have never met, of a species you barely understand. That's what makes us human, Marcus replied, checking his climbing gear. Sometimes we do stupid, dangerous things because it's the right thing to do. The descent into the Zilari structure was like entering a living dream. The walls pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that seemed to respond to their presence, creating a trail of light that guided them deeper into the complex. Marcus had to modify his climbing gear to accommodate the smooth, crystalline surfaces, while Thysiandra moved with fluid grace that defied gravity. Your people built this to last, Marcus observed, marveling at the intricate architecture that surrounded them. Even after eons of dormancy, the structure showed no signs of decay or damage beyond what the human mining had caused. We built it to preserve, Thyssandra corrected. Every surface, every crystal formation, every geometric pattern serves a purpose. This is not merely a shelter, but a repository of our entire civilization's knowledge and culture. As they descended, Marcus began to understand the true scale of what humanity had stumbled upon. The structure wasn't just a building or even a city. It was an archive, a library, a museum, and a tomb all combined into one vast testament to a species that had faced extinction and chosen to sleep rather than surrender to oblivion. The child's cries grew louder and more distressed as they moved deeper. Marcus could hear the harmony of fear and confusion in the alien voice, and something in his chest tightened in response. It didn't matter that this wasn't a human child. The sound of a young one in distress triggered something fundamental in his protective instincts. The preservation chambers are failing faster than we anticipated, Tysandra explained as they navigated a corridor lined with dormant crystal pods. The mining disrupted the power grid that has sustained us for millions of years. Most of my people managed to complete the awakening process, but Ysera was placed in deep stasis because her neural development was incomplete. They reached a vast chamber where dozens of crystal pods lined the walls like transparent coffins. Most were dark and empty, their occupants long since awakened. But near the center of the room, one pod flickered with unstable energy. Inside, barely visible through the swirling mist of preservation fluid, Marcus could make out a small figure thrashing in obvious distress. "The stasis field is collapsing," Tysandra said, its mental voice tight with worry. "If we cannot stabilize it, she will die. But the control systems require specific biological resonances to operate. Only another member of the royal bloodline can—" "What about me?" Marcus interrupted. "I'm not Zilari, but I'm here and I'm willing to try." Lysandra's multifaceted eyes focused on him with surprise. "Your species' neural patterns are completely different from ours. The probability of compatibility is essentially zero, but not actually zero," Marcus pointed out. He approached the failing pod, studying the crystalline control surfaces that covered its base. "Tell me what to do." The next few minutes were among the most intense of Marcus's life. Tysandra guided him through a complex sequence of touch patterns and mental focuses, trying to teach him to interface with technology that had been designed for an entirely different type of consciousness. The controls felt alien under his fingers, warm and somehow alive, responding to emotional states as much as physical contact. At first, nothing happened. Marcus pressed his palms against the crystal surfaces and tried to project the calm, protective feelings that Tysandra described, but the pod's fluctuations continued to worsen. The child inside was clearly in pain, her crystalline skin flickering between transparency and opacity as the preservation field destabilized. "It's not working," Marcus said, frustration building in his voice. "I can't make the connection." "Think of your lost companion," Tysandra advised. "Among our people, the deepest emotional resonances create the strongest mental bridges. Your grief may provide the intensity needed to reach across the species barrier." Marcus closed his eyes and let himself remember Elena. Not the accident or the funeral, but the good times. Her laugh when she caught him singing in the shower. The way she fell asleep reading, glasses sliding down her nose. The morning she told him she was pregnant, and the devastating miscarriage 3 weeks later that had started the slow dissolution of their marriage. Something shifted in the crystal beneath his hands. The warm living sensation spread up his arms and into his chest, creating a connection he couldn't describe in words. For a moment he felt what Tysandra felt, the desperate love of an adult for a child in danger, magnified by centuries of relationship and shared experience. The pod's fluctuations began to stabilize. The preservation field strengthened, its energy pattern smoothing from chaotic spikes to steady rhythmic pulses. Inside the chamber, the child's thrashing slowed, her cries fading to whimpers of confusion rather than pain. "Remarkable," Tysandra whispered. "I have never seen a cross-species resonance of such strength. You have temporarily stabilized the chamber, but she cannot remain in stasis indefinitely. The power grid is too damaged to sustain long-term preservation." "Then we get her out," Marcus said simply. "What's the procedure for emergency awakening?" Tysandra hesitated. "The process is dangerous for one so young. She may not survive the transition from stasis to full consciousness, and even if she does, she will need constant care and protection while her system adapts to the waking world." "Then we'd better make sure she gets it," Marcus replied. He studied the pod's control systems, trying to understand the alien interface through the tenuous mental connection he had established. "Walk me through it." The emergency awakening procedure was unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced. It required him to maintain the psychic link with the preservation system while gradually reducing the stasis field's intensity. He had to guide the child's consciousness gently back to awareness, like coaxing someone to wake from a deep sleep without startling them. Through the connection, he felt the alien child's mind stirring. Her thoughts were nothing like human consciousness, built around different sensory inputs and conceptual frameworks that made no sense to his mammalian brain. But underneath the alienness was something universal: confusion, fear, and the fundamental need for comfort and safety that defined all young creatures. The preservation fluid began to drain from the pod, revealing the child fully for the first time. She was perhaps 3 feet tall, with the same crystalline skin as the adult Zalari, but softer and more translucent. Her multifaceted eyes were larger in proportion to her head, giving her an appearance that Marcus's mind interpreted as simultaneously alien and endearing. As the pod opened with a soft hiss of escaping gases, the child tried to sit up but collapsed immediately. The stasis had left her weak and disoriented, unable to coordinate her movements. She looked around the chamber with obvious terror, her skin flickering through rapid color changes that Marcus somehow understood represented extreme distress. "It's okay," he said softly, reaching into the pod to help her. "You're safe now. We're going to take care of you." The child recoiled from his touch at first, but when Thysiandra projected calming thoughts, she allowed Marcus to lift her from the preservation chamber. She was surprisingly light, her body feeling almost hollow like a bird's bones. Her skin was warm against his hands with a texture somewhere between human flesh and polished stone. "What's her name?" Marcus asked as he cradled the child carefully. "Princess Ysarethis of the Third Resonance," Thisandra replied formally. "Daughter of Queen Nisandra, heir to the crystal throne of Zalara Prime. She is the last of the royal bloodline, the final link to our people's ancient traditions." Marcus looked down at the small, frightened creature in his arms. Princess or not, she was just a scared child who had woken up to find her world changed beyond recognition. "Hello, Ysera," he said gently. "My name is Marcus. I know everything seems scary right now, but I promise we're going to keep you safe." The journey back to the surface became a nightmare when the ancient structure began to collapse around them. The mining operations had destabilized more than just the power grid. Fundamental support systems that had maintained the underground complex for millions of years were failing in cascade patterns, creating a domino effect of destruction that threatened to bury them all. Marcus held Princess Ysera close to his chest as debris rained down from the crystalline ceiling. The child was still weak from her extended stasis, barely conscious and completely dependent on him for survival. Her small hands gripped his emergency suit with surprising strength, and he could feel her trembling against him as explosions echoed through the corridors. "The main ascent route has collapsed," Thysiandra reported, its mental voice strained with effort as it used its abilities to deflect falling chunks of crystal. "We must find an alternate path, but most of the emergency exits have been sealed for eons." Marcus activated his suit's proximity sensors, scanning for any route that might lead them back to the surface. The readings showed a maze of blocked passages and unstable areas, but there was one narrow corridor that seemed to angle upward toward the mining levels. "This way," he said, adjusting his grip on the princess and heading toward what looked like their only hope. The passage was barely wide enough for Marcus's shoulders, and he had to be extremely careful not to bang the child against the walls as they squeezed through. Behind them, the sounds of destruction grew louder. Entire sections of the ancient city were collapsing as the cascade failure spread throughout the structure. "Your people are above ground," Marcus said to Thysiandra as they climbed through a series of narrow shafts. "Can they help us from their end?" "They are trying," Thysiandra replied, "but their abilities are limited without the amplification systems of the deep chambers. The surface dwellers have only basic powers compared to what we once possessed." Princess Ysera stirred in Marcus's arms, her multifaceted eyes opening to focus on his face. When she tried to speak, the sounds that emerged were like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, musical but completely incomprehensible to human ears. However, through the psychic connection he had established with the preservation system, Marcus somehow understood her meaning. "She's asking where her mother is," he translated for Thysiandra. The adult Zalari's mental voice carried deep sadness. Queen Nisandra did not survive the long sleep. Her preservation chamber failed centuries ago. though we only discovered this when we began the awakening process. The princess is truly alone now. Marcus felt the child's confusion and growing fear as she sensed the emotions around her. Even without understanding the words, she could feel the grief and loss that permeated the conversation. Her small form shuddered against him, and she began to make soft keening sounds that needed no translation. "Hey, it's okay," Marcus said softly, shifting her to a more comfortable position as they navigated another tight squeeze. "I know you're scared and confused. I lost someone important too, but you're not alone, I promise. We're going to take care of you." The princess looked up at him with those strange, beautiful eyes, and Marcus felt something shift in the psychic connection between them. She was trying to understand him, reaching across the vast gulf between their species to make sense of his intentions and emotions. What she found there seemed to comfort her, because her trembling lessened and she settled more securely against his chest. They emerged into a larger chamber that Marcus recognized as part of the original mining excavation. His drill rig was still here, buried under tons of fallen debris, but the emergency ladder system he had installed was still intact. The climb to the surface would be treacherous, especially while carrying the princess, but it was their best chance. "Can you make it?" he asked Thysandra. The alien was showing signs of strain, its normally graceful movements becoming jerky and uncoordinated. "I will endure," Thysandra replied, though Marcus could sense the exhaustion in its mental voice. "The princess must reach safety. She carries within her genetic matrix the entire cultural memory of our species. If she dies, our civilization truly ends." Marcus began the ascent, using one arm to climb while the other cradled the princess protectively. The ladder rungs were slippery with condensation, and several times he nearly lost his grip as explosions from below shook the entire shaft. Each time he managed to recover, driven by the knowledge that a child's life depended on his strength and determination. Halfway up, disaster struck. A massive explosion from deep in the structure sent a shockwave through the shaft that shattered several ladder sections. Marcus found himself hanging by one hand. The princess clutched against his chest, with a 20-foot gap between him and the next intact section of ladder. "I can't make this jump," he called down to Thysandra, "not while carrying her." "Give her to me," Thysandra replied, floating upward with obvious effort. "I will attempt to lift her to safety using my abilities." But as Thysandra reached for the princess, the child recoiled with obvious terror. She had bonded with Marcus during their escape, and the idea of being separated from him sent her into a panic. Her crystalline skin flared with bright, frightened colors as she clung desperately to his suit. "She won't go," Marcus realized. "She's too scared." "Then we must find another way," Thysandra said. The alien positioned itself below Marcus and began to glow with intense internal light. "I will use my remaining strength to levitate you both, but I can only maintain it for a few moments." Marcus felt himself rising, lifted by forces he couldn't understand. The sensation was deeply unsettling, like being carried by invisible hands that could drop him at any moment. Below, Thysandra was clearly straining with the effort, its form beginning to flicker like a failing hologram. They reached the next section of intact ladder just as Thysandra's strength gave out. Marcus grabbed the rungs with desperate relief, feeling the alien's psychic grip release as his own hands found solid metal. Behind them, another series of explosions rocked the shaft, and he could see the lower sections beginning to collapse entirely. "Go," Thysandra urged, its mental voice now barely a whisper. "I will follow as I can, but you must reach the surface. The princess's survival is more important than my own." Marcus wanted to argue, to find some way to help the alien that had risked everything to save a human stranger and a child. But Princess Isera was growing heavier in his arms, her strength failing as the stress of the escape took its toll on her already weakened system. If he didn't get her to safety soon, she would die regardless of their heroic efforts. The final stretch of the climb passed in a blur of aching muscles and burning lungs. Marcus forced himself to move mechanically, one rung at a time, focusing only on the small weight in his arms and the distant circle of orange light that marked the surface. The princess had fallen unconscious, her breathing shallow and rapid. But she was still alive. When his hand finally closed on the edge of the excavation, strong arms reached down to pull him up. Dr. Walsh and several miners hauled them both to safety, their faces showing a mixture of relief and amazement. The security team was nowhere to be seen, apparently evacuated when the collapse began. "Medical kit," Marcus gasped, laying the princess gently on an emergency blanket. She needs help. Dr. Walsh immediately began examining the alien child with her portable scanners. Her vital signs are weak but stable, she reported. Whatever you did down there, it saved her life. Marcus looked back toward the excavation site, hoping to see Thysiandra emerge from the depths. But the opening was now completely blocked by fallen debris, and the explosions from below had finally stopped. The ancient Zalari city was gone, buried under millions of tons of rock and crystal. 3 days passed before Thysiandra finally emerged from the ruins. Marcus had barely slept during that time, maintaining a constant vigil over Princess Ysera, while the other Zalari worked desperately to reach their trapped companion. When the rescue finally succeeded, Thysiandra was badly injured, its crystalline form cracked and flickering with unstable energy patterns. "I thought we'd lost you too," Marcus said as Dr. Walsh's medical team attended to the alien leader. The princess stirred in his arms at the sound of Thysiandra's mental voice, her multifaceted eyes opening with obvious relief. "I am difficult to destroy," Thysiandra replied, though Marcus could sense the pain behind its words. "The collapse created a pocket where I could shelter, but I had to remain dormant for several cycles to conserve my remaining energy." The reunion between Thysiandra and the princess was touching, despite its alien nature. The child reached out with her small hands, and when Thysiandra touched her fingers, both aliens began to glow with a soft, harmonious light. Marcus felt an echo of their emotional connection through his own psychic link, a flood of relief, love, and desperate gratitude that brought tears to his eyes. "She has bonded with you," Thysiandra observed, noticing how the princess immediately turned back to Marcus after greeting her elder. "This is unprecedented in our history. No member of the royal bloodline has ever formed such an attachment to an alien species." "Kids are kids," Marcus replied, gently stroking the princess's crystalline hair. "Fear and trauma create bonds that cross any boundary. She needed someone to keep her safe, and I was there." The mining company's response to the situation was predictably corporate. They declared the site a total loss due to geological instability, and immediately began planning to relocate their operations to a different continent. The discovery of alien life was treated as a legal liability rather than a historic breakthrough, something to be covered up and forgotten as quickly as possible. Dr. Walsh fought the corporate decision with every resource at her disposal, sending reports to Earth governments and scientific institutions. But the mining company had contracts and lawyers, and they controlled all communications off-world. Her messages were blocked, her data confiscated, and she was threatened with breach of contract, lawsuits if she continued her unauthorized research activities. "They're going to bury this," she told Marcus as they sat in the temporary medical shelter where Princess Ysera was recovering. "Literally and figuratively. In 6 months, this will all be classified as industrial accident, and the Zalari will become corporate property." Marcus looked down at the sleeping child in his arms. Her small form finally relaxed and peaceful after days of trauma. "What about her?" "She's not property. She's a person. Try explaining that to corporate lawyers," Dr. Walsh said bitterly. "As far as they're concerned, she's an alien artifact with potential commercial value. They've already filed claims on any biological samples recovered from the site." The other Zalari survivors faced an equally grim future. Without their underground city and its vast knowledge archives, they were refugees with nowhere to go. The mining company offered to relocate them to a research facility on Earth, but everyone understood what that really meant. They would become lab subjects, studied and experimented on until human science extracted every useful secret from their biology and culture. "We will not go quietly," Thysiandra declared during one of the negotiations. "If your species insists on treating us as commodities, we will demonstrate why such treatment is unwise." The alien's words carried an undertone of threat that made the corporate representatives nervous. The Zalari had shown remarkable abilities during the rescue operation, powers that human science didn't understand and couldn't easily counter. If they chose to resist relocation, the mining company would need military support to enforce their claims. That night, Marcus made a decision that would change the course of his life. He couldn't stop the corporate machine or save all the Zalari, but he could protect the one small life that had been placed in his care. Princess Ysera deserved better than to become a lab specimen, and he was the only one in position to give her that chance. "I'm taking her off-world," he told Dr. Walsh. There are independent colonies out past the frontier, places where corporate law doesn't reach. She can grow up free there, maybe even find other survivors of her species someday. That's kidnapping, Dr. Walsh pointed out. You'll be a fugitive for the rest of your life. Better than letting them turn her into an experiment, Marcus replied. He had already started making preparations, using his miner's credentials to book passage on a freight hauler that would take them beyond corporate jurisdiction. Elena and I wanted children. We tried for years, but it never worked out. Maybe this is my chance to be the father I never got to be. Princess Ysera seemed to understand that something important was happening. She had become more alert over the past few days, her strength returning as she adapted to consciousness after eons of stasis. Her communication with Marcus had evolved beyond simple emotional exchange to something approaching genuine conversation, though it remained mostly telepathic rather than verbal. "You would protect me?" she asked during one of their mental conversations, her child's mind struggling with concepts of loyalty and sacrifice that even adult humans found difficult. "Always," Marcus promised. "No matter what happens, no matter where we have to go, I'll keep you safe." The escape plan was necessarily simple. Marcus would take Princess Ysera to the spaceport during the shift change, when security was lightest and most personnel were focused on the ongoing evacuation procedures. Dr. Walsh would create a distraction by accidentally triggering a medical emergency that would draw attention away from the transport area. Lysandra insisted on saying goodbye, though the alien leader was still weak from its injuries. The conversation between the two Zalari was private, conducted on psychic frequencies that Marcus couldn't access, but he could see the pain in both their postures. They were separating a child from the last adult of her species, breaking bonds that had sustained the Zalari for countless generations. "She carries our future now," Lysandra said to Marcus as they prepared to leave. "If our species has any hope of survival, it rests with her and whatever children she may someday have. You are taking responsibility not just for one young life, but for an entire civilization." Marcus felt the weight of that responsibility settling on his shoulders, heavier than any burden he had ever carried. "I understand. I won't let you down." "I know you will not," Lysandra replied. "You have already proven yourself worthy of our trust." The princess could not ask for a better guardian. The actual escape was almost anticlimactic. Marcus carried Princess Ysera through the spaceport hidden in a mining equipment container, her small form concealed among spare drill bits and environmental suits. The freight hauler's captain was a grizzled veteran of the outer colonies who asked no questions about unusual cargo as long as the payment cleared his accounts. As their ship lifted off from Kepler 442b, Marcus held Princess Ysera up to the small porthole so she could watch her homeworld fall away beneath them. She pressed her small hands against the transparent aluminum, her multifaceted eyes reflecting the orange glow of the alien sun. "Will we ever come back?" she asked through their mental link. Marcus considered lying, offering false hope of return and reunion. But children deserved honesty even when the truth was painful. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe someday when you're older and stronger. But for now we have to find a new home." Princess Ysera was quiet for a long moment, processing the magnitude of what was happening to her. Then she turned away from the porthole and settled into Marcus's arms with the absolute trust that only children could offer. "Home is where you are," she said simply, and Marcus felt his heart break and heal at the same time. 5 years passed on the frontier colony of Haven's Rest, and Princess Ysera grew from a frightened child into a remarkable young being who bridged 2 worlds. Marcus had chosen the remote settlement specifically for its isolation and independence from corporate control, but he hadn't expected how readily the colonists would accept an alien refugee as one of their own. Haven's Rest was populated by outcasts, refugees, and pioneers who had fled Earth's overcrowded cities and corporate-controlled worlds. They were farmers, artisans, scientists, and dreamers who valued freedom above comfort and asked few questions about anyone's past. When Marcus arrived with a young alien child, they simply shrugged and asked what skills he could contribute to the community. Ysera adapted to human society with surprising ease, though she retained distinctly Zalari characteristics that set her apart. She grew taller and more graceful with each passing year, her crystalline skin developing complex patterns that reflected her moods and thoughts. Her multifaceted eyes could see spectrums of light invisible to humans, and she often pointed out details in their environment that others missed entirely. "The crops in Sector 7 are diseased," she announced one morning, her young voice carrying the musical harmonics of her species. "I can see the blight spreading through the root systems." Marcus looked out at the wheat field, which appeared perfectly healthy to his eyes. But Isera's enhanced vision had proven reliable in the past, so he contacted the agricultural supervisor. Sure enough, soil analysis confirmed early-stage fungal infection that would have destroyed the entire harvest if left untreated. These moments of alien insight made Isera invaluable to the colony, but they also reminded Marcus that she was growing into something beyond human understanding. Her telepathic abilities had strengthened with age, and she could now communicate with some of the local wildlife in ways that amazed the colonists. More concerning to Marcus was the way she sometimes spoke of things that hadn't happened yet, casual references to future events that consistently proved accurate. "The supply ship will be 3 days late," she mentioned during breakfast one morning. "How do you know that?" Marcus asked. The ship wasn't due for another week, and there had been no communications about delays. Isera tilted her head in the way she did when trying to explain Zalari concepts in human terms. "I can feel the ripples of its passage through hyperspace. It encountered gravitational anomalies near the Helix Nebula and had to adjust course." 3 days later, the supply ship arrived exactly when she had predicted, its captain reporting, "Delays caused by unexpected gravitational disturbances in the Helix system." Marcus was beginning to understand that Isera's abilities went far beyond enhanced senses and telepathy. She was developing powers that her own species would have considered remarkable. The peaceful years came to an abrupt end when corporate security forces finally tracked them down. Marcus had known this day would come eventually, but he had hoped for more time. Isera was still young by Zalari standards, barely beginning to understand her own capabilities and heritage. "3 ships in high orbit," reported Sarah Chen, Haven's Rest's communications officer. "They're not responding to standard hails, but their configuration matches corporate security vessels." Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. "How long before they reach the surface?" "Shuttles are already launching," Sarah replied. "Maybe 2 hours before they arrive." The colonists of Haven's Rest had always known that their independence might be challenged someday, and they had prepared accordingly. While not heavily armed, they had established defensive positions and emergency evacuation procedures. More importantly, they had something corporate forces rarely encountered: a community willing to fight for its principles. "We won't let them take her," declared Thomas Rodriguez, the colony's unofficial leader and a former Earth military officer. "Corporate thugs have no authority here, and we don't recognize their claims." But Marcus knew that legal authority wouldn't matter to the security forces. They had tracked down a valuable alien specimen worth billions in research dollars, and they wouldn't be deterred by frontier colonists with hunting rifles and mining equipment. "They'll level the settlement if they have to," he told the gathered colonists. "Isera isn't worth that kind of sacrifice." "That's not your decision to make," Thomas replied firmly. "She's one of us now. We protect our own." Isera herself seemed strangely calm about the approaching threat. She stood at the observation deck of the colony's main building, her multifaceted eyes focused on something beyond the visible horizon. Her crystalline skin showed patterns Marcus had learned to associate with deep concentration. "They bring weapons and anger," she said without turning around. "But also fear. They do not understand what they are seeking to capture." "What do you mean?" Marcus asked, joining her at the observation window. "I am not the same child you rescued from the stasis chamber," Isera replied. 5 years among humans has changed me, awakened abilities that pure Zalari genetics could never have produced. I am something new, something unprecedented." As she spoke, the air around her began to shimmer with the same energy distortions Marcus remembered from their first encounter with the Zalari, but this was different, more controlled and purposeful. Isera was no longer a frightened child accidentally triggering alien powers. She was a young being learning to consciously wield abilities that defied human understanding. The first corporate shuttle touched down at the colony's landing pad exactly on schedule, disgorging a squad of armed security personnel led by a familiar face. Captain Rodriguez, the same man who had ordered the attack on the Zalari 5 years earlier, now wore the insignia of a corporate security director. Marcus Chen, Rodriguez called through his suit's external speakers. You are under arrest for kidnapping, theft of corporate assets, and violation of interstellar commerce regulations. Surrender the alien specimen and you may avoid execution for treason. Marcus stepped out of the main building with his hands visible, though not raised in surrender. Behind him, a dozen colonists emerged from concealed positions, their weapons trained on the security team. The standoff was tense but controlled, neither side wanting to fire the first shot. Her name is Ysera, Marcus said clearly. She's not a specimen or corporate property. She's a child under my protection. She's an alien artifact worth more than this entire colony, Rodriguez replied. Stand aside and let us complete our mission. I don't think so, said a new voice, and everyone turned to see Ysera walking calmly down the main street toward the confrontation. She had grown taller than Marcus remembered, her movements displaying the fluid grace of her species combined with something uniquely her own. The security team raised their weapons, but Rodriguez held up a hand to stop them from firing. He was staring at Ysera with a mixture of greed and uncertainty, clearly recognizing that she had changed significantly since their last encounter. You've grown, he observed. Good. Mature specimens are worth even more than juveniles. Ysera stopped about 20 feet from the security team, well within range of their weapons but showing no fear. Her crystalline skin began to glow with internal light, creating patterns that hurt to look at directly. You killed a child of my people, she said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in everyone's bones. You destroyed our city and scattered the survivors. You pursue me still, seeking to cage and study me like a laboratory animal. The energy distortion around Ysera intensified, and Marcus felt the familiar tingle of psychic pressure that accompanied Zalari power displays. But this was stronger than anything he had experienced before, a force that seemed to bend reality itself around the young alien. You want to study me? Ysera continued, taking a step forward. Then observe this. What happened next would be remembered in Haven's Rest for generations. Ysera raised her hands, and the corporate security team simply froze in place, their weapons becoming too heavy to hold, their armor too stiff to move in. They stood like statues, conscious and aware but completely unable to act. I am Princess Yserathis of the Third Resonance, she declared, her voice now carrying the authority of ancient royalty, combined with power beyond human comprehension. Daughter of queens, heir to the crystal throne and guardian of my people's memory. You will not capture me. You will not experiment on me. You will leave this place and never return. Rodriguez tried to speak, to give orders or threats, but no sound emerged from his paralyzed throat. His eyes showed understanding of what he faced, and for the first time, Marcus saw real fear in the corporate enforcer's expression. The corporate security forces remained frozen for 3 hours, while Ysera demonstrated the full extent of her evolved abilities. She didn't harm them, but she made it clear that she could have destroyed them all with a thought. When she finally released them from her psychic hold, they retreated to their shuttles without another word. Marcus watched the corporate ships disappear into hyperspace, knowing that more would come eventually. Word of Ysera's powers would spread through corporate channels, making her an even more valuable prize. But he also knew that she was no longer the helpless child he had rescued from the underground city. She had grown into something unprecedented, a fusion of Zalari heritage and human upbringing that created abilities neither species had imagined possible. Are you afraid of me now? Ysera asked that evening as they sat together watching Haven's Rest's twin moons rise over the horizon. Marcus considered the question carefully. The demonstration of power had been impressive and terrifying, but it hadn't changed how he felt about the young being he had raised as his own daughter. No, he said finally. I'm proud of you. You've become everything your people could have hoped for and more. Ysera's crystalline skin flickered with patterns that Marcus had learned to recognize as gratitude and affection. The humans here have taught me something my people never understood, she said. Power without compassion is meaningless. Strength without love is just destruction. Over the following months, something remarkable happened. Word of the incident spread beyond corporate channels to independent colonies, alien rights organizations, and frontier communities throughout human space. Ysera became a symbol of resistance against corporate exploitation, a living reminder that not all alien contact had to end in dominance and submission. Delegations began arriving at Haven's Rest from across the galaxy. Some were human scientists and diplomats seeking to establish formal relations with the last Zalari princess. Others were representatives of alien species that had suffered under human expansion, hoping to find an advocate who understood both sides of the cultural divide. Most surprising were the Zalari survivors who emerged from hiding throughout human space. Lysandra had been wrong about their group being the only survivors. Small populations of their people had established secret colonies on dozens of worlds, preserving their culture while avoiding human detection. They had heard of the princess's awakening and had come to see if the legends of the royal bloodline's return were true. The reunion between Ysera and her surviving people was emotional beyond anything Marcus had witnessed. The adult Zalari knelt before their young princess, their crystalline forms glowing with harmonious light as they shared memories and cultural knowledge that had been preserved across generations of exile. But when the traditional ceremonies concluded and the elders urged Ysera to return with them to rebuild their civilization on a hidden world, she surprised everyone with her response. "I am honored by your loyalty and grateful for your survival," she told the assembled Zalari. "But I cannot abandon the humans who have given me a home and a family. My place is here, bridging the gap between our species and working to prevent the tragedies that scattered our people." The decision created controversy among both humans and Zalari. Some saw it as betrayal of her heritage, while others viewed it as necessary evolution for a species facing extinction. Marcus understood the weight of what she was choosing, and he made sure she knew that he would support whatever path she decided to take. "You don't have to stay for me," he told her during one of their private conversations. "Your people need you, and you could do great things leading them to a new future." "My people include humans now," Ysera replied. "You saved my life and gave me the love of a father." The colonists of Haven's Rest welcomed an alien child without question or condition. "Dr. Walsh risked her career to protect me from corporate exploitation. These bonds are as sacred as bloodline or tradition." The compromise they eventually reached satisfied no one completely, but worked better than anyone expected. Ysera would divide her time between Haven's Rest and the hidden Zalari colonies, serving as both cultural bridge and political advocate. She established the first interspecies council in human space, bringing together representatives from dozens of worlds to address issues of expansion, exploitation, and coexistence. Marcus continued as her guardian and advisor, though their relationship evolved as she matured into her role as a galactic leader. She was no longer the frightened child he had carried through fire, but she remained the daughter of his heart, the family he had never expected to find among the stars. Years later, when historians wrote about the transformation of human-alien relations in the 25th century, they would mark the rescue of Princess Ysera as the turning point. Not because of the dramatic events or the display of alien powers, but because of the simple human choice to protect a child in need, regardless of species or consequence. At the 10th anniversary celebration of the Haven's Rest Accord, the treaty that established the legal framework for alien rights in human space, Marcus found himself standing before a crowd of thousands representing dozens of species. As the guest of honor, he was expected to give a speech about courage and sacrifice and the importance of interspecies cooperation. Instead, he talked about a small alien child who had lost everything and found the strength to forgive the species that had destroyed her world. He spoke of colonists who risked their lives to protect a stranger, and of the choice every person faced when confronted with suffering they had the power to address. "I didn't set out to change the galaxy," he concluded. "I just tried to keep one child safe. But sometimes that's how the biggest changes happen. One small act of compassion at a time." In the front row, Princess Ysera watched with the multifaceted eyes that had once looked up at him in terror and confusion, now reflecting the wisdom of a leader who had learned to blend Zalari heritage with human values. When he finished speaking, she stood and approached the podium, her crystalline form radiating the dignity of ancient royalty and the warmth of genuine affection. "This human carried me through fire when I was helpless," she announced to the assembled crowd. "He gave me a home when I had none, protection when I was vulnerable, and love when I was alone. Today I kneel before him not as a princess to a subject, but as a daughter honoring the father who taught her that family is defined by choice, not blood. As Princess Ysera knelt before Marcus, her crystalline skin glowing with patterns of respect and love, the crowd fell silent. The image would become iconic throughout human space. The last princess of an ancient alien civilization, kneeling before a simple human miner who had chosen compassion over profit, love over fear. Marcus helped her to her feet, as he had done countless times when she was young, and the crowd erupted in applause that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. But all he could see was the child he had rescued, grown into a leader who would guide two species toward a future neither could achieve alone. In the end, the galaxy was changed not by weapons or politics or corporate power, but by a man who saw a frightened child and decided that her life mattered more than his own safety. It was the most human thing he could have done, and it made all the difference in the universe.